I will be forever the myth.
You're the king of kings, Arnold.
There's always a pecking order. The little peckers never mess with the big peckers. So I'm a rooster, and he's a chicken, so to speak.
This episode of Bodybuilding History is brought to you by the website bodybuildinglegendshow.com. I'm your host, John Hansen, and on today's episode of Bodybuilding History, I'm going to talk about the 1967 NABBA Mr. Universe. This was the historic contest where Arnold Schwarzenegger won his very first Mr. Universe contest at only 20 years old, and this is a record that still stands to today. No one has won the Mr. Universe contest at a younger age than 20 years old, and Arnold Schwarzenegger did it in 1967. It was also the year that Bill Pearl won his third Mr. Universe contest, and Bill won the pro division, and Arnold won the amateur. So let's get into it. The 1967 NABBA Mr. Universe was the 19th annual Mr. Universe event, and it was held on September 23rd, 1967 in London, England. The contest featured over 70 competitors, and it was sold out 2 months in advance, so this was a really big event. Let's go over the amateur event first. As always, the amateur contest was contested in 3 different height classes: the short class, the medium class, and the tall class, also known as Class 3, Class 2, and Class 1. Short class featured 17 competitors from all over the world. The countries included England, St Lucia, France, Sweden, Singapore, Jamaica, Barbados, and Wales. The winner of the short class was John Citroni from England. John stood about 5'4", but he had a really massive build. This was John's 4th NABBA Mr. Universe contest, and he won his class also in 1966, the year before. John won the Mr. Britain contest also that year in 1966, so he was definitely one of England's top bodybuilders. In second place that year in the short class was Wilford Sylvester from St Lucia. Wilford was living in England at the time also, and he was actually that year's Mr. Britain winner. This was Wilford's 3rd NABBA Mr. Universe contest, and he had taken second to John Citroni the year before in 1966. Wilford ended up winning the short class in the NABBA Mr. Universe the next year in 1968, where he beat out Franco Colombo. Wilford was a very impressive bodybuilder, very muscular. In fact, he won the most muscular award that year. So they gave out a most muscular trophy in 1967. Third place in the short class that year was Terry Parkinson from England. Terry was also a former Mr. Britain winner. He won the contest in 1965. All right, let's go on to the medium class at the Mr. Universe that year. This class also featured 17 competitors. And again, these competitors came from all over the world. The medium class featured competitors from Germany, South Africa, Belgium, Spain, Norway, England, Malta, Barbados, Sweden, Holland, Italy, and Wales. And the winner of the class was Albert Beckles. Albert, of course, would go on to become one of the best pro bodybuilders in the IFBB, but at this point, he was still an amateur. He was still working his way up the ladder, and he took first place in the medium class this year. Albert was originally from Barbados, but he was now living in England. This was his 3rd NABBA Mr. Universe contest, and he had only taken 6th place the year before in 1966. So he really made a lot of improvement in 1 year. Albert had an incredible physique. He had 19-inch arms at this contest. Of course, his world-famous peak biceps were on display. Second place in the medium class went to Roy Callender, another future IFBB pro bodybuilder. Roy was also from Barbados. He was competing in his first NABBA Mr. Universe contest, and you could tell this guy had a great future ahead of him because he was so thick. And then third place that year in the medium class was Arthur Fairhurst. He was also from England. All right, now we go to the tall class. The tall class featured 11 competitors, and this class was for any competitor over 5'11". The tall class featured competitors from South Africa, India, England, Jamaica, Scotland, Trinidad, the USA, and of course, Austria. So the tall class was a big showdown between Arnold Schwarzenegger from Austria. Arnold was actually living in Munich, Germany at the time, but he was originally from Austria. And the USA competitor, who was Dennis Tinerino. So Dennis had won that year's AAU Mr. America contest, and it was customary for the AAU Mr. America winner to go over to England and compete in the NABBA Mr. Universe contest. So Arnold had taken second place the year before at only 19 years old to Chet Yorton from the USA. And it was a great debut because Arnold was so big. He just wasn't really polished enough yet. He didn't have a tan. He wasn't cut enough. And his legs were a little bit weak. And that's where Chet Yorton beat him. But after a year of intense training, Arnold really brought his legs up. He came into the contest tan. He was much more polished. His posing was way better. And he was probably the biggest competitor on stage that night, except for maybe Bill Pearl. Arnold was probably at that time one of the biggest bodybuilders in the world, and he was only 20 years old. According to the official program at the NABBA Universe that year, Arnold stood 6'2" and he weighed 245 pounds. He had an 18-inch neck, a 32-inch waist, 27-inch thighs, 18.5-inch calves, 21.5-inch arms, and a massive 57-inch chest. So Arnold was really something to see, especially, again, at only 20 years old. So according to the reports I read from the contest, it wasn't even close. He beat out Dennis Tinerino, but Dennis had a great physique. He was that year's Mr. America winner, as I said before, and he actually had better leg development than Arnold, and he was very cut for the contest. He was in great shape. So looking at some of the pictures, it looks like it was a pretty close event, but I think according to the judges' score sheets, Arnold won a unanimous victory. Henry Greaves, who was from Trinidad, he was in third place. And a noteworthy competitor in the tall class was Frank Richard from England. Frank would go on to win this class at the NABBA Universe in 1970. At this contest, however, in 1967, he was only in sixth place. So in the overall contest, it was Arnold Schwarzenegger from the tall class, Albert Beckles from the medium class, and John Citroni from the short class. Three great class winners. But Arnold was, again, a unanimous victor. His height, his size, his overwhelming mass, it was just too much for all the competitors. Arnold, as I said, was one of the most promising bodybuilders in the world at this time. And this win at the NABBA Universe really got Joe Weider's attention. And eventually, that's why Joe brought Arnold over to the United States 1 year later in 1968. So great victory for Arnold Schwarzenegger. This was really one of the seminal contests of his career, because it really got him noticed on an international stage. All right, now we go to the professional title, which was held in two classes, a short class and a tall class. The short class was for anybody 5'8" and under, and the tall class was, of course, over 5'8". In the short class, you had Charles Sintat from France. He took first place. Second place went to Giuseppe Diana from Italy. Now, Giuseppe would go on to compete in the IFBB a couple years later. And at the 1971 Ifbb Mr. Universe contest, which was held in France, promoted by Serge Nubret, Giuseppe won the short class that year, where Albert Beckles won the overall. And then Ludwig Ingenbretsen from Norway was in third place. All right, in the tall class, of course, we got Bill Pearl coming back to win his third Mr. Universe title. According to the reports I read, it wasn't even close. Everybody in the audience was waiting for Bill Pearl to come out. He was one of the most popular and one of the best bodybuilders in the world at that point. Bill had won the 1953 AAU Mr. America contest, and then he also won the NABBA Universe contest in the amateur division that same year. 8 years later, Bill came back to the NABBA Universe, and he won his first pro division, which was the 1961 Pro NABBA Mr. Universe contest. So in 1967, 6 years later, Bill wins his second pro event. This was typical for bodybuilders like Bill Pearl and Reg Park. They didn't really compete every year. They would come back every 5 or 6 years and they would win another title. I know in Bill Pearl's case, he had gyms in California and he would try to win a Mr. Universe contest every few years or so just to promote his new gyms. So Bill Pearl, like Arnold, was one of the most massive bodybuilders in the world at that point. According to the official program at the NABBA Mr. Universe, Bill stood 5'11" and weighed 230 pounds. He was 36 years old at the time. Bill had an 18 3/4 inch neck, a 34-inch waist, a 28.5-inch thigh, a 19-inch calf, a 19.5-inch arm, and a 54-inch chest. So Bill was a really massive guy. Actually, he was bigger in all his measurements than Arnold Schwarzenegger was, except for the arms and the chest. And he was actually several inches shorter than Arnold. So that just goes to show you how thickly built and how massive Bill Pearl was at the time. Second place to Bill in the tall class of the pro division was Nicholas Cleiber from Germany. Nicholas was a pretty consistent competitor in the NABBA Mr. Universe back in those days. John Bubb from England was in third place. John was also competing in the NABBA Universe several years. I know he was in the event in 1969 and also in 1970 when Arnold won. And then fourth place went to Karl Blumer from Germany. Karl began competing in the NABBA Universe, and then he was another guy who went over to the IFBB. Unfortunately, Karl just passed away this year in 2020. So in the overall, in the pro division, no doubt about it, was Bill Pearl. Bill Pearl was a popular winner. So when you see those pictures of Arnold Schwarzenegger and Bill Pearl standing together, that was because Arnold was the amateur winner, Bill was the pro winner. Unfortunately, Arnold and Bill never met in competition. That was supposed to happen in 1971, but Joe Weider prevented Arnold from going over to NABBA to compete in the Mr. Universe contest. If Arnold would have won that year in 1971, that would have been Arnold's 5th Mr. Universe victory, which at the time would have beaten the record, because I think the record was 4 Mr. Universe wins set by Arnold, and Bill Pearl ended up winning that year in 1971, so that was his 4th NABBA Mr. Universe win as well. Everybody was waiting to see a 40-year-old Bill Pearl go up against a 23-year-old Arnold Schwarzenegger, but unfortunately it just never happened. It's one of those what-if moments in bodybuilding history that we all wish would have happened. But as it was, the 1967 NABBA Mr. Universe, one of the greatest NABBA Mr. Universes in bodybuilding history, because it was Arnold Schwarzenegger's first win in the NABBA Mr. Universe at only 20 years old, and it was also Bill Pearl's 3rd NABBA Mr. Universe victory. So if you like this video, be sure to like it and subscribe to the channel for more episodes of bodybuilding history, which is going to be coming your way. And check out bodybuildinglegendshow.com. And don't forget to check out the Bodybuilding Legends podcast every week, which is available on Apple, Stitcher, Spotify, and other podcast platforms. This is John Hansen with Bodybuilding History for the bodybuildinglegendshow.com. See you next time.